Eating anything but.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Khidki Collective's first book talk of 2025. Today, we're discussing this book, the 1948 Hyderabad readings, One Period, Many Views. And we have with us today the editors of the anthology, Mohammed Ayub Khan, Anant Maringanti, and Gita Ramaswamy. So thank you for joining with us to the editors and to the rest of you who are here on a Sunday evening. So, before I begin, I'll just give a brief overview of Khidki Collective. We may have some of you who've joined us newly. My name is Swathi Shivanand, and I'm going to be moderating the session today. So, the Khidki Collective started in 2021 with the motto of translating and communicating academic insights to non-academic publics. As part of this effort, we've undertaken public writing series, which has been published in online news portals such as The Wire, News Minute, and The Scroll. So we've also translated some of these public writings from English to the languages of the Deccan, namely Kannada and Marathi and Telugu. We also organize conversations with early career scholars who've been working on various periods of the Deccan and various regions within the Deccan itself. We did this as part of building an academic cohort of early career scholars and opening up the platform for non-public audiences interested in the Deccan. We've The latest thing that the Khidki Collective did was to organize a public writing workshop because we also realized that a lot of academics struggle to write in a language that is easily accessible to non-academic publics. So that's what we've been doing till now. It's a completely voluntary initiative, and so which is why some of our efforts are sporadic. And intermittent. But if you are interested in joining us, please do email us, and we'd be happy to have you on board. So with that, I'm going to begin the session formally. And as I said, we're discussing a new anthology on the market, which is this 1948 readings of One Period, Many Views. So the book is published by Southside Books, which is an imprint of the Hyderabad Book Trust, and it's been edited, like I said, by Anant Maringanti, Mohammed Ayub Khan, and Gita Ramaswamy. Just to give a brief context of the scholarship on 1948, many of you who've joined here are most likely aware of the momentous significance of 1948, the period of police action, and the political upheavals before and after the event, and it's had enormous significance in terms of the political, economic, emotional, and social histories of the Deccan, and this anthology is brings very important historical voices, first person analysis, some early scholarship on the Hyderabad Deccan region. And in that sense, it's bringing back several important voices back in circulation. And this is also especially important because the 1948 police action is constantly being revived. It's being used in aid of contemporary politics from all kinds of political realms and parties. So it's important in that sense, to revisit some of the earlier scholarship on 1948, but also first-person accounts, eyewitness testimonies of that period. And I think the anthology does a great job of bringing such important voices back into circulation for us. So the other important aspect of 1948 to locate it is there's a lot of rethinking about this period of 1948 because this is now being seen as another site of partition. So most partition scholarship and most public memory or public common sense about partition locates it within two important sites of Punjab and Bengal. But new scholarship is showing us that an important site of violence and of reshaping and remaking the Indian nation took place here in Hyderabad, far away from Punjab and Bengal. So, in that sense, there's been a lot of rethinking about the period of 1948, and we need to understand and locate this book within this new and emerging critical scholarship. We for us at Khidki Collective, the 1945, not 1948, has been a very significant sort of event around which we have organized several things, including our latest public writing series, which was curated by Yamini, Pramod, and I. And this was published in News Minute. So those of you who are interested, please do look up. We were rethinking, we were trying to bring in different voices around the 1948 police action. We had articles written by various scholars who were looking at the 1948 from the perspective of caste, of looking at women's voices, looking at how it's being used in films and popular culture. And in fact, this was one of our most successful series in the sense that it was translated into Kannada, Marathi, and Telugu, and generated a lot of, as you can expect, very heated discussion about this kind of new scholarship. So, so all of this is to provide you context for why this is important for us as well at Khidki Collective, and we're really happy to have to host the editors here today and to discuss the book. How this session will go on is that I will invite the editors to speak a bit about the book and what prompted them to bring this anthology together at this particular moment in time. And we will then open it up to some of you to ask any questions you might have based on what you've heard the editors speak. The later part of the session is going to be around. There are four of us who are going to be discussing particular chapters from the book that spoke to us, and we'll talk about a little bit about the significance of the book for us, our own intellectual contribution, and how that might help locate the book for many of you who are still on the edge about whether to buy this or not. All right. So with that, I'm going to request the editors. Let me give you a brief introduction of the editors. Mohammed Ayub Khan, a very good friend of Khidki and one of the founding members of Khidki Collective, is a Toronto-based researcher and public administration professional. He was born in Hyderabad and raised in Canada and the US. Ayub is a supremely meticulous archivist, bibliophile, and researcher with a keen interest in Muslim minorities and Hyderabad's histories. He's promised to not show us his face for some reason, so we're going to just hear his voice. We also have with us Gita Ramaswamy, who many of you know already. She's the founder of Hyderabad Book Trust and Southside Books, and is a well-known activist, independent publisher, and author. Anant Maringanti is a geographer. He's the founding director of Hyderabad Urban Lab and has an interest in regional dynamics of development in post-colonial context. Anant was also one of the founding members of the Khidki Collective, and the Khidki Collective was initially housed at the Hyderabad Urban Lab as well. So with that, I hand over to the editors to take this conversation forward. Tell us a little bit about what was the thinking behind the book, and was there any particular criteria that that went into choosing some of the first-person accounts or historical scholarship around this. So, the floor is open to the editors.
You will go first.
Sure, but Anant, I was hoping that you will go first since you are the intellectual among the group. So thank you, Swathi. and the entire Khidki team for organizing this, not only this talk, but the series. I think you have opened up new avenues to bring scholarship to the public, but also the other way around. So really appreciate it. So this book was actually the brainchild of both Gita and Anant. And 1948 and the events associated with it have a long history in the public memory of the formation of the Indian nation. But also there has been a history of suppression or the marginalization of the various voices which were impacted or which impacted the events of 1948. So our idea was to bring out those voices. There have been some self-suppression and there have been suppression of these voices. Many of the people who experienced 1948, there has been a long history of self-suppression. So we have tried to bring that out, especially I can point to the essay by Abdul Rahman Khan. He was a 12-year-old child at that time, and his family was his father was a Indian nationalist, so as to say, but his family members were also associated with Majlis. But so he experienced it. He suppressed it for a long time. He had migrated to US and he was teaching mathematics and computer science at a college in Chicago. But then I used to have long chats with him, and then he wrote some articles for an online group, and then this essay came out of that. He sadly passed away 2 years ago. Apart from these personal experiences, there were also other voices which have been kind of sidelined. For example, the Dalit voice. I don't think that has been talked enough. So basically, we organized the essays around three themes. One is the emergence and evolution of political consciousness in Hyderabad. So that's one group of essays. The second is the rise of communalism. And the third is the aftermath or both the police, the events of police action and their aftermath. So on one end, there was suppression of voices, self-suppression, and which came out. The example is Abdur Rahman Khan's essay. The second is the government suppression of certain voices. For example, Makhdoom's long essay on 1947, it was banned by the Hyderabad government. And for a long time, nobody could trace it. But luckily, we were able to recover it. And Mahek Hyderabadi has done an excellent job translating it. And then there are also voices like Jayaprakash Narayan, which were out there, but for some reason, not enough adequate attention was paid to them. So we have brought that out as well. And then there are also not much has been done on what kind of an impact social, political, cultural, educational 1948 had on Hyderabad as a whole. So we have a short essay by Professor Harun Khar Sherwani, a prominent historian of the Deccan. So that essay, I think, was originally presented in Geneva, and it captures provides a general overview of what kind of changes were happening at that time. So basically, I view this work as a continuation of other work done by Professor Harun Khan Sherwani, Dr. Omar Khalidi, whose book Hyderabad After the Fall continues to remain classic. Um, so, so basically bringing out the voices which have been self-marginalized or self-suppressed, and also which have been sidelined to the fore, and study the impact of 1948 from different perspectives. Another important thing is the inclusion of the Pandit Sundarlal report. I know there have been a lot of debate surrounding this. So it has been out in the public domain for a while, but I think it needs to be studied more carefully, because on one hand, it points out to the massacres and the violence that happened, but it also brings out the solidarities. For example, it mentions that in certain districts, Hindu and Muslim weavers actually helped out each other. So not enough has been said about caste solidarities going beyond the religious divide. So I think this is the right time to discuss these kind of solidarities in the light of what is being presented as a stark divide based on religion. So I think I'll stop here. The real talk should be done by the panelists. So I think the poet Josh Malihabadi, he was asked to comment on his own book. So he said, Bakra Hazir hai. So we'll let the panelists, esteemed panelists, comment on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ayub. Gita, do you want to say something? Gita, are you here?
Yes, I am there. Sorry, the Zoom is giving me problems. No, I really don't want to add anything. Thank you so much.
All right. So I guess I also don't have a lot more to add to what Ayub has already said. Bakra Hazar Hai is the best way of putting it. But I will say a few things just to put this in some context. To start with, to me, most of my work, most of my projects, whether it is in writing or in setting up a lab or setting up a research project, has always been about friendships. And my work stems out of friendships of various kinds. And so in some very interesting ways, this particular book came out of a set of friendships, demands that came out of friendships and so on. A long time ago, Gita started saying that you and I have to do a book together. Somewhere in the beginning of COVID, we began to talk about why and how it is important to build friendships when co-presence spatially and temporally is not possible. How do we do it? And part of those conversations and strange connections that happened was the creation of Khidki and building up a friendship with Ayub, which has then opened up a lot of interesting conversations for me, which have had to do with my own history, my own curiosities, and so on. That's one part of the motivation for the book. There is a set of intellectual questions that have always fascinated me, at least for the last 25 years or so. These are not my main areas of work, but these are areas in which I have a certain continuing curiosity. One of those curiosities is about all of those strange holes that are left behind, craters left behind by decolonization. Hyderabad is just one, Kashmir is another, the creation of Israel is another. Across the world, wherever you go, you will find these kinds of locations which are extremely difficult, extremely painful. They have left behind memories that people don't know how to interpret even today, and people are struggling. And this is something which I kept coming across over the last 25 years in most of my work, whether I go to a small village, I go to Chicago, I go to Minneapolis, I go wherever I go, I'm seeing the traces of this moment. And so to me, 1948 is not just Hyderabad. Hyderabad is one of them. There are many other places like Hyderabad around that time, and they all signify something very, very global and very powerful. And I think it's important for us to figure out how to think about this. The second thing is that in the post-independence India, there are multiple arcs of modernity, and that's the only way in which I can describe this. And these multiple arcs of modernity do not necessarily always appear to be coeval. They seem to be struggling with each other. They seem to be um, um, morphing into other kinds of power struggles. But somewhere there is this sense that in becoming Indian, somewhere we have all been left behind, somewhere we have all been struggling to stay ahead, and we don't quite know what to do with this. And I can think of it in terms of modernity, and we have a tendency to think of this also as a peculiarly Hyderabadi problem. But one conversation I remember which really struck me was that was when at the end of a conversation around how Hyderabad has been seen as this backward place. Somebody said that, look, I mean, this is true for just about every place. No, none of us is Indian enough. We have all struggled with this. So thinking about Hyderabad will probably open up a way of thinking about being Indian. What does it mean? The violence that we have lived with and what to make of it. So I can think of any number of ways in which the intellectual questions will open up, and then they go back to really painful memories and so on. And that's the third point that I wanted to make. I have often found that one of the challenges in thinking about something like 1948 Hyderabad is that people often tend to fall back on a very limited archive. The rest of the archive, which should be available to people, which should be alive, which should allow people to tell multiple stories, is just not available at all in any accessible manner. And so when Gita said that we should try and put together something that is easily accessible, I jumped onto that for the simple reason that, I mean, how do you make sure that Sundarlal committee report and Abdul Rahim Khan can be read together, right? And how do we make sure then that the Dalit story, the Muslim story, the testimony of someone who witnessed violence, they all somehow jostle with each other for people's attention so that people can then begin to talk about these things in multiple registers. Because in the face of a totalitarian regime, the thing that we need to do is to unlock and give some freedom to unleash multiple tongues, multiple languages, multiple registers in which we can talk about these things. And that the only way to do it is to make material available freely, easily, offer people multiple frameworks of interpretation. And I think that's the most important political work that needs to be done now. So that's the motivation for me, and the content, the selection of these pieces is, I mean, it doesn't even have to be said. It's not exhaustive. It is not meant to be exhaustive. The one reminder that that always comes back to me when in my own teaching work, in my own writing work, is this a reminder from Ramsey that history leaves an infinity of traces in each of us. that doesn't give you a catalog. And the task of any critical elaboration is to put together that catalog. That's where it has to begin. And so what we have done in essence is put together a sort of a catalog or the beginnings of a catalog. And it's for people to put together their own catalog so that they can act meaningfully. And that's what I think we did. And that's the reason why it's important for us to hear what the readers think about the different chapters, how they think the book speaks to them, how they think parts of the book speak to them. It's all legitimate, and it's all very important for us to go forward. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Anant. Thank you, Ayub and Gita. So at this point, we can open up the floor for any questions that that the audience might have to the editors. And then we'll start with discussing some of the chapters as well. You can raise your hands or unmute yourself and ask if you have any questions. So we've heard from Ayub and from Anant about some of the motivations behind this book, behind this anthology, and Anant very nicely laid out the whole decolonization sort of impetus, the logic of bringing out voices, critical voices, and Ayub also spoke about the marginalization of voices and the political act of bringing them back um, into circulation. So we've heard from the editors. So if we have any questions at this point, we can take a couple of questions before moving on to the discussions. Pramod, are you speaking? Because we can't hear you. All right. So I had a question of my own. I wanted to understand what are some of the writings perhaps that you had to keep out of the anthology. Were there any debates amongst the three of you or disagreements about it from the three of you about what needs to be included, what should not be included, etc.?
We did have lots of conversations about that. Definitely one thing that we struggled with is how do we make the texts actually accessible? The primary issue was that people at different points of time, writing from different moments and different lived experiences, write very differently.
Correct.
And for something to become accessible, you have to edit the text. And it's a huge dilemma, right? I mean, what is legitimate editing and what is not? Gita is very bold, very confident in doing that. I struggled a little bit about what to do, and Ayub has been actually very pragmatic about it, saying that this is where we can do it, this is where we cannot do it. And I think that the fact that there are three of us who come to it from very different backgrounds and very different considerations really helped us put it together. That's one very important resource that we actually had. Because Gita is very, very clear that the book has to be read by people. And I'm not going to give them a dense text, a boring text that they will skip. Right?
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Hi, audible?
Yes,
yes,
you're
you are.
Yeah, hi. First of all, I want to just thank you for bringing this book, but I have series of complaints. Apart from, because it opens up in a certain way, I have not read the book as such. I have glanced through it. I'll start with the cover. What does that cover means? A chessboard. And how do you look at what do you want to convey through a cover? Should I say set of other
Absolutely.
questions?
Just list out all the complaints.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
then we can pretend that we have run out of time and move on.
so I just glanced through the your introduction also, and as well as the series of articles and things you compiled together. So first thing, when I read the introduction, I didn't understand why is that certain text is brought. How is the or thanks to Ayub, he brought out said it very openly that there are three ways that essays are compiled. But in introduction, why is that one is reading? How do one should read? Introduction, I don't felt that key introduction gives any sign how one should read this text. That one thing I felt when I was I read the introduction. Most of other essays I have read it some other way because I work on that particular topic. So one or two left behind. So other second thing is most of these essays are also available in a certain way in a public domain, are circulated about whenever you look at police action, you will come across Sunita's essay, or you will come across other essays also. So what I'm saying is this one, these are already in circulation in certain way, apart from few which are very new one. Third thing, I am again the focus of this whole book is again located in Hyderabad, and I am constantly this is my constant complaint ki people who work on Hyderabad, particularly on police action, they don't look at what is happening outside. There are no essays from Marathwada, or for that matter, Bidar, Hyderabad, Karnataka. Interestingly, Umar Khalidi brought one essay on Bidar, one of the brilliant essay, Ratna Naidu's essay on Bidar in his collection. So that is another my complaint. Third one is what you said in passing that there is limited archive. I bit disagree with one thing. Even if we look at Sherman Taylor's book, there is so rich archive. She is very easily able to access it. Even the National Archive. I feel what True Lot has said, silencing the past is a different ways in which in a what is an archive and what way people archive access to the archive and a process of making into history. So in all different stages we don't access it. That's the reason. Otherwise archive is, I feel it's not out of access as such. Yeah, these are some. I'll come back after some.
Great. Can I respond to this? And
Yes.
all right. Pramod, first of all, I thanks for pointing out all of these things. And I'm going to flip the question back to you at the end of this response from me. But immediately, the thing is that there are archives and archives of various kinds, and archives are things that on which I have spent a lot of my time in the last few years, not in the way in which historians do it, but in the sense that archives are materials that are generated in the process of doing something else. These are traces of all kinds, and they are floating around, and they need to be held together in some place. The provenance does matter, the repository matters, but in the end, it's the curation of that material and making it accessible to people, which is something which is very, very important. Now, I know what you mean when you say that the archive is available. Of course, it's available in all kinds of places, and Sherman Taylor has done. I mean, who could have done more of archival material being accessible on Hyderabad than Omar Khalidi himself? But the question is that how easily accessible these things are to everyday readers, people who have who are not likely to be professional academics, scholars, or historians. And that's where the real question to me is that how do we make these things accessible to people? In what forms, in what ways, where, and so on. So to me, the book itself is not all that important. The book becomes a context, the book becomes a pretext for having conversations of this kind, and this conversation should happen everywhere. That's all there is to me. I make no claims to the idea that this book actually does something very great in terms of making archives that have not hitherto been available to people now. Definitely not. That's just not the claim being made at all. Yeah. The second thing then is that, as I said, this book is not meant to be exhaustive. This book, the kind of articulation that you heard from Ayub actually was not the starting point for the book. We didn't start by thinking and saying that, okay, let's try and put together a book here, which is going to do a set of readings on emergence of a certain kind of political consciousness in Hyderabad, and so on and so forth. That pattern emerged as we put things together somewhat instinctively, intuitively, and groped our way through it, right? And is that a very scientific way of doing it? Is that the most politically correct way of doing it? I have no idea. I really don't have any idea, and I make no claims on that. What I do think is that, and this is where I'm going to flip it back to you, is that if material from Bidar, Gulbarga, material from Nanded, material from Jalna, material from all kinds of other places outside of Hyderabad city. It could be Medak, it could be places in Adilabad. Then how do we bring them out? In what forms, in what locations, and through what mechanisms are we going to make them available to people? And I think that it's just an urgent task that needs to be done. That's all. So 1948 volume 2 has to come out, and it has to come out very soon. And it doesn't have to be produced by Southside Books. It can be produced by anyone. I think that you should do it, and we will all love to see it.
Can you tell about book cover?
The book cover, I really don't have much to say. Gita, do you have?
Yeah, this is you are a collective of academics, and I am someone who's stood against academics for most of my life because of various reasons which I'm not going into right now. My constant effort has to bring university or what you're discussing in the university to lay people so that we have a more informed understanding of what happened in the past and then necessarily what's happening today. So the book cover is really to attract the common reader, was not meant to convey anything, but the various symbols we put there was to signify the various aspects of the players in that context. That was all there is to it.
So no deep meaning.
No deep meaning. Attractive cover for the reader. What is this all about, this chessboard? And who are these players? Can I pick up the book and find out something which is interesting to me? And I think it is important because there is such a great divide today, which I find even after the book is out. One section feels, why did you include Dalits? Who are Dalits in this context? Another section feels, what is Jayaprakash Narayan's voice doing? And then why are you including Razakar accounts? We are so divided that the effort was only to help the reader read a perspective which was not hers to start with. So the cover was inclusive in that fashion.
And argue with each other as much as you want. Make long lists of complaints, and I think that we should all make long lists of complaints. That's the only way we can get work done. So
Because
absolutely.
I just want to answer what you said to, when I started working on police action, it's like a long decade back. My first thing was the same thing. There is nothing available. But when I started looking at, it's like everywhere. I collected certain things called moticha ova. Ova is in the morning folklore, when they grind the grains, they sing early in the morning.
Yeah.
So I found there are particular form women sing in Marathwada. It's called moticha ova. And who sings death in the early morning? But these women are singing death in the early in the morning. So you
Yeah.
see, why I'm saying about this is this. My complaint in form. I'm very happy that something like comes up little, opens up more space for what is not there. But I also found several of Dalit autobiographies actually in Marathi speaks about this, particularly in the context of Marathwada Namantar movement, where the Razakar issue came back. Dalit
Yeah.
Razakar came back. So there are several of Dalit autobiographies narrate the violence itself. So what we don't have much is eyewitness accounts and things. So I tried to collect those eyewitness accounts and stuff. But yeah, there are lot of work which I found in. I can't access Urdu, but some of the autobiographies I found in Urdu. We translated one in Marathi also, or some essays we found Muslim writers writing in Marathi. So that's the reason why I'm saying I'm sure there will be certain expressions.
No, Pramod, I just want to reiterate what I said, right? The point
Yeah,
is not that the archive is not there.
yeah,
It's there everywhere. And
yeah,
that's precisely the point, that it is so ubiquitous and it has become so commonplace that you don't actually notice it at all. And
yeah.
it is often not easily accessible across all kinds of boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we need to find ways of breaking. I can think of any number of Dalit activists who've been trying to figure out what to make of Shyam Sundar in Hyderabad, Shyam Sundar in Bangalore, Shyam Sundar in right. I mean, it's a very different world altogether where you go,
Yeah.
right? And
So
and
I think, sorry to,
available
I
is
think
important.
we sort of need to move on because we have other
Tara
things
Wahid
as
wants to
well.
say something.
But
You
I
can just
think, yes, I think Pramod is raising some very important questions about 1948 being very Hyderabad centric and not really looking at the districts, and some of the sources from other Dakhini languages as well. So I think we'll come to some of that in the discussions of the chapters itself. So we'll have one last question from
Swathi,
Sarah.
one second.
Yes,
I
Ayub.
would at the end, towards the end, I would like to
Sure.
answer to all the compliments of Pramod, but towards the end. So give me some time.
All right, sure,
Thank you.
absolutely. Sarah, you can go ahead with your question.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, Sarah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to reading this collection. I actually haven't been able to read it yet, but it strikes me that, one of the things I noticed immediately about the way that this moment is covered more broadly within within South Asian historiography and also specifically in India, is that you can find volumes on the partition 1947, right? I mean, again and again, you see these volumes that are produced that focus entirely on Punjab and Bengal. I'm thinking of a particular volume, but there's like all ways in which, even in the more recent sort of anthologies, that these, what we would call primary source documents, right? I mean, these are documents of voices who are recording what is happening from different, I mean, of course, all of these voices that have been included are from different perspectives, and that these perspectives are not part of the broader, Indian nationalist or even just broader scholarly historiography on this partition. And then what happens then is that Hyderabad state, like many other princely states, I mean, Kashmir is a different issue because it generates a particular set of questions given its, location and geography, and for all the wars have been fought over Kashmir. But Hyderabad gets subsumed in a 47 historiography where it is silenced. So I'm thinking more broadly about how a book like this kind of fills that kind of gap, both scholarly and public facing. I mean, public facing for sure, that has already been addressed, that this is for, you have a collection, you have everything, you have not everything, but several things put together in one place, precisely because the placeness of Hyderabad has been excluded from like all of this partition historiography. The second thing I wanted to bring up was sort of thinking about these voices, like in Bidar and elsewhere. This would actually require doing serious oral history work. So that would mean actually going to these places, interviewing people, locating them. I mean, some of this work has been done. There was a film, I'm forgetting this young student's name now.
Murad.
Murad, okay, on
Yeah.
the pomegranate turns gray. I mean, in that case, it's a very particular sort of, he's actually his starting point is the family. But I mean, he ends up going and talking to people, like there's interviews in there. And I think this is what it would mean, is if you wish to actually sort of bring out even more voices going forward, then it would require a serious oral history records, like to get eyewitness accounts. I mean, one of the big projects that was done on 1947 was that partition archive, right? And there were citizen historians. They took some webinars on oral histories, and they started recording these stories, recording people who had been witness to either the violence or lived through that time and had things to say about what they remember of that time. And these were all recorded, and now it's like in some, I don't know, Stanford University bought it or something like that. But the point here is that, when I think about this moment, and we think about places like these border regions or the state of Hyderabad more broadly, and all of these areas. I mean, in Bidar, there are a lot of stories actually, and there are people who are still alive, who are in their 90s, who actually have really vivid memories, and many who want to speak about what they witnessed, and or speak about what the stories were passed down from their parents. And I think what a volume like this does is it opens up the possibility, because it ends up in the hands of all kinds of people who will then read this and say, oh, I remember this, or I lived through this, or I have a family member. I mean, there are ways in which some of the kind of, when texts circulate or when material circulates, there are a lot of people who want to actually speak about what happened now, or are ready to speak about what happened now, especially in their older years, And I think that it would require doing some serious oral history, which only amplifies the multiple archival written sources, because of course there's a hierarchy amongst historians about what kind of sources they privilege. They tend to privilege written sources. And yet it's the oral testimonies by which you will find the stories of the most oppressed classes, and the most sort of marginalized voices, that of women, Dalits, and so on. So that kind of work would require like serious sort of field work, and going out and meeting people and talking to them and recording their stories.
Thank you, Sarah, for this. I think both Pramod and Sarah bring very important points to us. One being the idea that that we need to look at other kinds of sources as well, apart from textual sources, to be able to perhaps write other histories of the 1948 police action. But also, it's a useful point for us to remember also that much of our scholarship also replicates the biases of the archive. Particularly because many archives are state-driven. So I think Sarah makes a very useful point for us to think about what it means to collect testimonies, and not just for scholarship. And in fact, when Pomegranate Turns Grey collects a testimony and presents it in a much more evocative way than a lot of scholarship can actually do. So I think Thank you, Sarah, also for talking about the generative possibilities of this anthology. And I think Pramod's criticism is in that way a direction for us to think about what else is possible when we are thinking about this very formative moment, not just in Hyderabad's history, but also in the making of the Indian nation. So thank you for both of you for your comments. I'm going to move ahead to the next part of this of the of the session here today, and we're going to have we have four discussants who will each be discussing one chapter from the book, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you some of these to introduce you to all these discussants. So first up, we have Mohammed Muti Rahman, who is an independent researcher based in Hyderabad. He holds a master's degree in peace and conflict studies from Nelson Mandela Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Rahman's research interests primarily revolve around questions of violence, state, and Muslim subjectivity in South Asia. So, over to you, Rahman. Please let us know what is the chapter that we'll be discussing, and yeah, and we're looking forward to your discussion. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. First of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on this very important collection of essays. I mean, the chapter that I am talking on, or rather on which I would like to discuss, is Javed Alam's changing grounds of communal mobilization, MIM and Hyderabadi Muslims. So my interests are broadly, as it has always been also been mentioned, that I'm more interested in the question of violence and what does violence mean, and how this genocidal violence plays out in the larger political working of Muslims, and particularly minority, or this condition of minority, and how it impacts and influences the Muslim political or Muslim politics in general. Uh, uh, when I'm thinking of 1948, then I think the larger question that I'm concerned with is how this event in itself, like many scholars within academia, have come to this certain conclusion after Benjamin and all, that there is this law-making violence, and then there is this law-preserving violence. Both are mythic violence in Benjaminian sense, but it still carries a weight that there are this. Even Kojin Karatani argues that there is this repetition of this founding movement. So how this violence of this founding movement is there, and it still functions in our everyday lives, and how it has been it repeats at different times. So with that understanding, I'm more interested into the questions of loss, or what has happened in 1948, and how this loss is expressed, and how this loss takes different forms within different registers within Muslims of Hyderabad. So loss. Before getting into that, I think the context of the paper, or the context, Javed Alam's paper, in that sense, is a very interesting paper to think through, or to think about these questions, or these larger questions of violence and state and Muslim political subjectivity in Hyderabad. Before I get into the very context, or before I get into what Javed Alam is trying to argue in this paper, I think it's very important to understand that this paper essentially was written as an essay in a book that was edited by Gyanendra Pandey. So this book has come, or this essay was written in 1992 after Babri's demolition. But the ethnographic work that Javed was doing was around 1990s, between the riots of 1984 and 1990 riots. So with that ethnographic research, he has come out come with this paper. So before this when this essay was written, there was no Sundarlal committee report that has come out. There was no Sachar committee report that has come out. So in that sense, I mean, I'll get to this question at the end of how these documents are very plays a very interesting role when it comes to Muslim politics in India, or Muslim politics in post-colonial India, and how this essays kind of mediate not just memories but also political struggles of Muslims, and how it shifts the discourses. I mean, I think Deepak Mehta has argued how the memories of violence are mediated by these inquiry commissions and inquiry reports, and how this memory fluctuates and mediated through these documents. So Javed Alam, when he's writing this essay, it is before Sundarlal committee report, and the dominant academic narrative around violence or around communal incidents was very different, in the sense that there was Vashni, there was Sudhir Kakkar, who was also writing on Hyderabad 1990s violence. There were other scholars who were writing on Hyderabad's violence, and there were other set of scholars like Rashiduddin Khan and G. Ram Reddy, who were writing on Majlis as a communal organization that is kind of inciting these riots. So the larger framework was largely instrumental, in the sense that the political or the agency of Muslims was stripped out. Like, for example, if you look at Rashiduddin Khan and G. Ram Reddy, so it was argued that Muslim masses are just tools of the political elite, or tools of the Muslim elite and or the political leaders, and how they the way they want to use them, the masses get flown by it, and then riots happen. So Javed Alam, in that sense, breaks that stereotype and breaks that larger framework and looks into his larger concern. And this has been something that has been his concern for, I think, quite some time, of how there is this upward mobility between communities. So there is heterogeneity between communities, between Hindus and Muslims, within Hindus and Muslims, and how there is this upward mobility and how it helps us to understand the communal situation and communal context. So with this brief context of how, when this was written, textual context, then the contextual context was after riots, after 1990 riots. Specifically, the communal violence starts in Hyderabad after, say, 1978, which becomes monumental event in the local politics of Hyderabad, where there is Ramiz Abi's incident and this violence around Ramiz Abi. So these questions in itself are very important, in the sense that this violence has always been seen as a violence that was against, as a kind of communal violence. But it is also interesting to look at how Shefali Jha, who is also a student of Javed Alam, writes that the violence that was brought up, the violence or the protest in 1978 riots after Ramiz Abi was also a kind of protest against the police, because the incident of Ramiz Abi was around this violence that was perpetrated by police. So this police action 1948 has, or rather this incidents of violence has forced Javed Alam in a way to look at this founding movement, and how that founding movement informs the violence that that takes forms in the post-colonial India, and how it kind of is still there, still present in everyday lives, and still present in the violent incidents that happen in Hyderabad. So within that, I think Ramiz Abi incident is also very interesting. I mean, I'm more interested in that question, since it also comes from certain personal space. So like one of my grandmother, who was also a victim of police action, I think is in her own expressions of police action is very, I mean, if I could put it under the box of a fear, then I think she's very fearful of police. And she's very, I mean, she narrates of those incidents of police action. And then after that, even now when she lives, or even now when she goes out, she's more concerned of this police violence. So when I was going to Delhi to complete my master's in Jamia, so this was around NRCCA protest. After that, I went to Delhi. So she was very concerned, because she has seen these movements of violence of police that has happened in Delhi. So this violence and the fear of police is still there within Muslims. I think that the traces of those fear are still, or the traces of that 1948 violence are still there in multiple registers or multiple avenues of how people themselves think of 1948, and also how state functions in after 1948. So there are this multiple, what we see as surveillance today is also a kind of trace of this 1948 violence, and how police has become a kind of a fearful figure for Muslims in Hyderabad. What Javed is trying to do, and I'll just cut down to the larger argument that Javed is making within this paper, is that Javed, first of all, is trying to bring up this question of what Majlis has done when it is trying, when Majlis is bringing a certain political agency to Muslims in Hyderabad. Initially, it is coming up with this question of past glory and past power that Muslims had in Hyderabad. So the loss that Muslims experienced after 1948, and the kind of loss of self-esteem and self-confidence of Muslims is re-energized, or rather comes back with the coming of Majlis in 1957. And when Majlis comes back to power, so I'm not taking the part of the history that Javed narrates in the whole story, but rather taking at the very end and reflections that Javed tried to make. So when Majlis is coming back to power, it is looking at these past glory and narratives of this past power, and through that it is trying to break this loss of self-esteem, and is trying to energize Muslims of Hyderabad. And within that, I think Javed tries to break this stereotype that Majlis is trying to make not a very communalist position per se, but rather a communitarian position, where the very binary of communal and secular is broken by Majlis Ittihadul Muslimin after coming to power in Hyderabad around when Salar becomes the MP of Hyderabad. These expressions of loss and the Muslim subject in itself then becomes a dominant question of how they are gaining this power after 1948 and after coming of Majlis to power. When Salar or Sultan Salahuddin Owaisi is raising these concerns that that we are the way Javed is trying to look at this question is saying that this is also a kind of looking at past through how Hindutva also looks at past. I think that is where a certain problem arises, because it again falls into the binary of communal and secular. There are multiple registers through which multiple authors have tried to look at this question. So some people have tried to say that the very 1948 movement explains how it can be registered under the question of fall of Andalusia. Some people have tried to look, even Afsar, I think, looks at the question for saying that it is part of Karbala imagination and how it helps Muslims in re-energizing their energies and re-energizing their political struggle to stand up against the state, stand up against the violence, stand up against what has happened to them. So what has happened after 1948 is through these multiple registers and through these multiple events that Muslims in Hyderabad are trying to register. I think within that, every event in itself then explains what this event or reveals what how the state works and how the state is functioning in Hyderabad after 1948. I'll just end with last one thing that Javed interestingly puts out in his essay that has been that is not part of this essay that has been published in the book. I think within that, Javed says that after riots, there was this movement where Muslims themselves are mobilizing the money and mobilizing everything, and the space that the state should have taken in being the benefactor of Muslims and being the benefactors of citizens was replaced by Muslims by this call of Majlis, as they are the Jamaat or they are the collective of the Muslims that will help them, and they don't need the state as such. So Muslims within this narrative, they also are coming up with they're also building schools and colleges, and even now, if you look at the slogans of Majlis and the speeches of Majlis, then we think then there are these assertions of Jamaat, and even in political rallies, they come up with these questions saying that we made this and we did this, and there is no manifesto of Majlis when they come in elections. So this is an assertion of this past that after 1948, after riot, generally when there is this violence that pushes them towards political rights and pushes them towards claiming something from the state, what Majlis did was inverting that very position of the state. And this in itself comes as a very resisting praxis of resisting the state by becoming self-reliant in a sense that they would reclaim their authority as a resisting force, and not in the sense of repeating something or reviving something, but rather making the space for themselves and being a collective or a community that is not very communal per se, but is very communitarian in that sense. So I think this in itself explains how Majlis has been very powerful enough to re-energize the lost self-esteems of Muslim and to break those shackles of fears that Muslims in Hyderabad were facing after 1948. So this was what I thought I would be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahman, for this elucidation of Javed Alam's essay. Because in the interest of time, we're just going to move on to the next discussion, and then we can collect some questions that you may have for the discussants as well as the editors. So the next discussant we have is Dr. Himabindu Chintakunta. She works on media and cultural history of the Deccan, and her work highlights the networks of public life of regional elites of princely Hyderabad. Over to you, Himabindu.
Thank you, Swathi. So for today's presentation, I have a chapter by Gail Omid on Hyderabad and Andhra 1946 to 56, Revolution, Repression and Recuperation. My interest was, research interest has also been what has been the conflicting, the conditions leading up to the 1948, the moment of 1948. And I chose this to understand I chose this essay to understand basically what Gail Ombit is trying to create a narrative about what will be the future of Hyderabad post 1948, and thereby the future of Dalits in the princely state of Hyderabad after that. And this is peculiar. This is specifically in the context of because the chapter ends at 1956, which is when we have linguistic reorganization of states and formation of Andhra Pradesh as a state based on Telugu linguistically reorganized state that Andhra Pradesh emerges as. So to give like a brief outline of how the organization of the chapter itself, it starts off with the chapter starts off with talking about the discussions that happened around 1946, when the political future of Hyderabad was under discussion, whether it should join the accession of Hyderabad into Indian Union, or the discussions around Azad Hyderabad were being put forward. And around this very politically intense climate, the Dalit organizations which played a prominent role in reimagining the future or the position of Dalits, on how these organizations imagine the political future of Dalits is the point of discussion. And like in the first, if you look at the book cover that has been under discussion, so the key players or the players and what were the imaginations that they had for this region and for the people. And we have the discussion is mainly around the Congress and communists and the Dalit leaders and activists and organizations, which we will get into detail. And also the conflict between the communist leadership and the Congress leadership, and the conflict within the communist leadership, and the conflict between and basically the how these all these players were coming together, were having their different interests for the future of Hyderabad is what is under discussion. And this is a fairly detailed chapter in terms of its descriptions, and the political choices have and the political choices are described in detail, and the context is also given in detail. Due to paucity of time, I'm not going to get into each individual detail, but broadly, this is about, it talks about the conflict in within Dalit organizations and the political positions that they want to take, and the divisions between communist leadership and the position of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and also the position of communists in Hyderabad, particularly in Telangana, coming from districts, interior districts of Nalgonda, Warangal, Mahbubnagar. Also, more importantly, the myth or the narratives, the left narratives around Telangana peasant revolt and eventual Dalit reorganizing between 1948 to 1956 is the broad outline. So this chapter talks about the context in which all these organizations were trying to vie for their positions in the political future of Hyderabad and the emerging Indian nation. And among the prominent Dalit organizations are Scheduled Caste Federation SCF and Depressed Classes Association DCA. SCF was led by Subbaya, and DCA was under the leadership of Venkat Rao. And when in 1946, the elections, the discussions around conducting elections in Hyderabad based on interest groups rather than territorial constituencies was proposed. The Depressed Classes Association accepted such a reform where there would be 50-50 Hindu-Muslim representation, whereas Scheduled Caste Federation, Congress, Communists, all of them rejected such a move. And some of the important historical figures that come under discussion in this chapter are P. Venkataswamy and Shyam Sundar, who asked for a conditional acceptance of such a reform, conditional acceptance of such a reform, whereas the Congress, the Congress group and the Communists also actively opposed or rejected such a reform. And in Hyderabad, through various accounts in the chapter, we realize how Venkat Rao and Shyam Sundar crystallize a pro-Muslim position, and Gail Ombit provides narrative account of the speeches given by both Venkat Rao and Shyam Sundar, and how they wanted Dalits to be in support of how they were forging a more pro-Muslim alliance in imagining a political future for Hyderabad, and in the process we're also saying that the high caste Hindus, be it in Congress or under the communist leadership, were not actively supporting the cause of the depressed classes or the scheduled castes. So they saw a future. They imagined a future with a pro Muslim alliance for Hyderabad. And they also, at some level, went against what Ambedkar has in the article. Gail Ombit mentions that with Hyderabad Independence Day celebration, they also go against what Ambedkar has envisioned. So basically trying to lay out a ground about the conflicts within Dalit organizations and Dalit leadership itself in the imagination of Hyderabad. And then but the conflicts are not only between Dalit organizations and its leadership, but the conflicts were also within the communist leadership, where if Ambedkar showed, I would like to read a line. If Ambedkar showed a negative pragmatic realism in treating independence as inevitable and focused on gains for Dalits within the bourgeois regime to come, communists took the opposite extreme and called for an all-out insurrection. And this basically is talking about two opposing positions when imagining the future for Hyderabad. And this we talk in terms of the Telangana peasant revolt, where land becomes a very important question. The redistribution of land becomes a very important question, and how the land, there was a repeated redefining of land ceilings that has happened under the communist leadership for land distribution, and high land ceilings were repeatedly being redefined, and then the left parties gained the reputation of being at the interest of the rich peasants as opposed to the oppressed Dalit castes, and it put Dalits in a peculiar position because not all the land that was owned, the land which was under the state and which was not under any particular private ownership it was easy to distribute such kind of land, be it whether it is a forest land or common lands were easy to be redistributed. But when the land redistribution came to the high caste and the huge landholding communities, most of those lands were under tenant farmers, where these tenant farmers and and Dalits could not actively oppose such the tenant farmers immediately, because they came from this middle class, and it would become difficult for in terms of drawing support in terms of coming together and drawing support from each other. So these are the ways in which the article lays out different conflicts. And going back to what the introduction says, that what we have is only a kind of, there can only be provisional closures and provisional openings. And these are some of the choices that were available for Dalits at that point of time. And within those choices, the kind of political futures were imagined. And I would like to recollect the article of Pramod here as well, on how he write about minority alliances that he has written on around Shyam Sundar as an important figure, and how Shyam Sundar gets branded as a Razakar, and because of which his position, political position, and his call for his political imagination for future of Dalits is gets sidelined because of the narrative of him being branded as a Razakar. Whereas, and I like how Pramod also ends the narrative, saying that ends his article saying that we also wear Ambedkar's coat and carry Shyam Sundar's photo in our pockets, because it is crucial to understand politics of organizing and reimagining a future for in a newly independent nation. What is going to be the position of Dalits, and what has been post 1956 and continued future? What has been the position of Dalits in our newly independent nation is a point of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Himabindu. So we have a third discussant for today with Dr. Yamini Krishna, works on film history, urban history, and Deccan history, and she's also the founding member of the Khidki Collective. Over to you, Yamini.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to discuss the essay written by Nawab Ali Yavar Jung. Since 1948 is such an important moment in the history of Hyderabad, one can think of ideas, people who were significant before the event and after the event. There are very few ideas and people who are able to transition post 48 and pre 48 to post 48. There are several things which get lost as well. Nawab Ali Yavar Jung is one of them who's able to transition to the socio-political milieu post 48 as well. I'm presenting a brief introduction to the personality himself, and then I'll get into what he's written about the event, because his personality is kind of important in understanding his perspective on the event itself. Nawab Ali Yavar Jung studied BA in modern history from Oxford, and then studied history of French in India in Paris. He was a reader, then professor of modern history in Osmania University and Aligarh Muslim University. Osmania University, and then he became the vice chancellor of both Osmania University as well as Aligarh Muslim University. He took both academic and administrative posts in the government, Hyderabad government, such as Secretary of Constitutional Affairs, member of Municipal Committee, the president of Deccan History Section of Indian History Congress. And as I said, later as the vice chancellor of both of these universities as well. So here you see someone who's a trained historian, who's writing serious history scholarship, but who's also able to be an administrator. And he becomes, and his career becomes more administrative post 48. After 48, he had a successful career as a diplomat. Was the Indian delegate to the UN General Assembly, ambassador of Argentina, France, Yugoslavia, Greece, USA, and so on. And another important thing which is quite unusual is that he was awarded the Padma Bhushan and Padma Vibhushan as well. So when I'm talking about pre-48 and post-48, pretty much in the thick of the things in both of these periods. Thus, in Ali Yavar Jung, we have a rare combination of a trained historian and administrator who seems to have navigated both the Hyderabad state government and post-independence Indian government. The essay Hyderabad in retrospect was also very interestingly published anonymously in the Times of India after Ali Yavar Jung had resigned from his administrative positions in the government of Hyderabad. In this essay, he also presents like as an anonymous writer, he presents a overview of what his role, what the role of Nawab Ali Yavar Jung was also in this whole events of 1948. In this essay, Ali Yavar Jung gives an assessment of the dramatis personae and the historical forces which were part of this period in police action. One of the first social forces which Ali Yavar Jung lists is the conflict between the Mulkis and the non-Mulkis, which I found very interesting. Also, I mean, one of the reasons why I chose this particular essay is also because of my interest in some of the figures of this period, pre-48, who were able to transition. Like one such, I'm also working on Mohyuddin Qadri Zor, and both of them being contemporaries. So I've been interested in Ali Yavar Jung as a figure. That's also why this interest, and because again there are some commonalities of being a mulki and this consciousness of mulki being one of the important aspects of how Ali Yavar Jung's worldview works, and I will show you how that works. He, along with other mulkis such as Padmaja Naidu, Fazlur Rahman, Madhapati Ramchandra Rao, B. Ramakrishna Rao, etc., had started the Society of Union and Progress, which was advocating for responsible government. He emphasizes that they had kept communalism at bay in their group. He notes that Mulkis wanted a responsible government, but this was opposed by the non-Mulkis, that is, Muslims from the north. He notes this, I'm quoting him, that they found their best security, the non-Mulki Muslims, that they found their best security in the encouragement of communal ideal, which would bring the Muslims, Mulki and non-Mulki, closer together and divide the Mulkis. The fires lighted by these outsiders were fanned by the communal breezes from British India. In this sense, he attributes the importance given to religious identity over regional identity, that is, the identity of being a Muslim over that of being a mulki, as one of the issues which contributed to the events of 1948. In fact, he attributes communal identity to into this state, into the activities of non-mulkis like Qasim Razvi, who he specifically mentions that he's an Aligarh graduate, and which is also kind of draws that lineage. Ali Yavar Jung discusses the civil disobedience movement, the state congress, where the state congress, Arya Samaj, and Hindu Mahasabha worked together as one of the like almost like a setting up events before which sort of lays the ground for what happens in 1948. He characterizes both of this, the civil disobedience of Congress, Arya Samaj, and Hindu Mahasabha, and the work of Ittihad as communal. Both of them, he calls them as communal organizations. And he says on the question of another important event or another important discussion, which he says changed the way 48 would have played out, is the question of reform and what reform would mean. On the question of reform and the proposal to have representation by interests, that is, by 50% of elected representatives be Hindus and 50% be Muslims, and two nominated Christians and one Parsi. Bahadur Yar Jung, Ali Yavar Jung notes, had demanded that the state be declared a Muslim state, that joint electorates should be replaced by separate electorates, and three nominees of the Nizams from Sarfi Khas should be Muslims, so as to balance the two Christians and one Parsi, and thus receive a Muslim non-Muslim parity instead of this division based on interest. So which Ali Yavar Jung finds as a problem, one of the problems. He says that, but there is a difference in how he characterizes both Bahadur Yar Jung versus Qasim Razvi. I'll come to it slightly later. So he says that this was one of the important turns in the events of the time. He notes that the failure of Sir Akbar Haidari, and later the Nawab of Chattari to manage the growing communalization of Ittihad was one of the contributing forces for setting stage of 1948. Here he also lists his own inability. He says that this Nawab Ali Jang who was responsible for police, but he was his hands were tied by the administration which did not cooperate, and he had to leave. So he almost gives a kind of a confession, anonymous confession, saying that I really couldn't do much in this essay, which I found quite interesting. Ali Jang discusses Bahadur Yar Jang and Qasim Razvi in detail. He notes that initially Bahadur Yar Jang was impressed by the democratic urges of Europe and has subscribed to the idea of responsible government. His discussion on mulki non-mulki is also relevant here because he presents Ali Bahadur Yar Jang as a mulki, and hence was more in tune with what Hyderabad needed as opposed to Qasim Razvi. He notes Ali Yar Jang writes that however there was a difference of opinion between him and Bahadur Yar Jang. While both of them wanted democratic reforms for Hyderabad state, Bahadur Yar Jang wanted Muslims to organize politically first. And Ali Yar Jang notes that this wouldn't be agreeable because a similar reaction would happen among the Hindus, which would lead to communalization. Ali Yar Jang writes, unlike Bahadur Yar Jang Mulki, Ali Yar Jang characterizes Qasim Razvi as, I'm quoting, a fanatic with passion for power, and who used gundas and never tolerated opinion differing from him. He says Bahadur Yar Jang could easily be friends with someone who was not of his opinion, whereas Rezvi was someone who couldn't tolerate his opinion. And hence, in that, he's drawing this lineage of Mulki versus non-Mulki throughout these characters as well. He wrote that Razvi toyed with the idea of becoming the Jinnah of the South. Ali Jang ends the essay with several pertinent questions, which sort of summarizes the issues which were festering under the events of 1948. Whatever was happening in 1948 was one, but he also sort of, because I think it's the historian in him, when he's sort of putting forward several of these things which are not really often discussed as events of 1948, but he says that these are actually the things which were, festering underneath the events of 48. He asks, I'm reading a short section. Is the military government only to deal with the problems of law and order and administration and leave to the Constituent Assembly and the popular government even those adjustments to the new situation in economic, social, and cultural fields which are required in preparation for the integration to come? Will such a waiting not cause frustration, opposition, and extremism? Is there no need to make a beginning to take the first step, at least, in the direction of rebuilding the social order, creating a national mind and consciousness, redressing the economic grievances, and secularizing the state and its institutions? Are the communists in the two districts of Nalgonda and Warangal to be dealt with only by police and military action? This I find quite prescient in the way the state even now handles, what they call as Naxal extremism. He says, are the communists in the two districts of Nalgonda and Warangal to be dealt with only by police or military action? Will they not come back to life the moment such action ceases? Should not a beginning be made in the direction of agrarian reforms? Should not the administration of Sarfik Khas and Jagirs be taken over so that their people may no longer be deprived of those standards of administration and the facilities for education, medical relief, and public health which their brothers in the rest of the state enjoy? Must the mother tongue medium continue to be ignored even in the secondary stage? These tasks are more of nature of remedying deficiencies or wrongs. Must even these wait the advent of Constituent Assembly? It is with this that Ali Jang ends his essay, and I think these questions are also pertinent for us to think about because some of these questions continue to exist, and some of these questions sort of haunt us even in the contemporary. Yeah, that's it. And I will introduce Swathi now, who will be our next discussant. Dr. Swathi Shivanand is a founding member of Khidki Collective. Her doctoral and public-facing work has focused on modern and contemporary histories of Deccan and its development trajectories. Swathi, over to you.
Thank you, Yamini. So I am going to be discussing the next essay in the book. So Yamini looked at Hyderabad in retrospect, which is an excerpt from Nawab Ali Awar Jung's book, a series of essays. I am looking at an excerpt from the book by Muhammad Haider, which is the book is called October Coup, a memoir of the struggle for Hyderabad. So, for those of you who may not know, Muhammad Haider was the collector of Osmanabad in the pre-police action period, and this is an account, a personal account of his travails in the post-police action period. At least the excerpt that we have in the book. So this is a personal account of a political event that had repercussions for thousands of civil servants in particular. As a civil servant, as a former civil servant. Mohammed Haider writes to us about the kinds of about his particular role and the kinds of things that he witnessed in the days leading up to the police action. So the excerpt in the book begins by looking at Mohammed Haider's conversations with the Director General of Police, with Qasim Rizvi himself, and his efforts along with the Director General Nawab Yar Jung, his efforts to prevent Qasim Rizvi from undertaking certain disastrous actions that would have had repercussions, communal repercussions, not just in Hyderabad but also elsewhere in other parts of India as well. So, so the essay begins by looking at the efforts that many important civil servants or many important people in different positions of the government were who had a clear sense that Hyderabad could not really stand against the might of the Indian Army, and worked in some sense together to prevent the aftermath of the police action that we did actually witness. So Mohammed Haider is talking about his conversations with Qasim Rizvi, with Nawab Yar Jung, and the ways in which they were somehow able to avert certain actions that Qasim Rizvi was planning to undertake at the time that the Indian Army was reaching Hyderabad. So, Mohammed Haider. So this is also the time when Pakistan's already in existence, and there is much movement happening of the elites of Hyderabad, elites and government elites in both socially as well as in the government sector, who are moving to Hyderabad in order to in due to fear or in anticipation that that they could be at the wrong hands of the law in a post accession Hyderabad. So Mohammed Haider is asked is advised repeatedly by several people, several of his well-wishers, as he states, to move to Pakistan, and but he refuses, and he says I'm proud of the work that I did in Osmanabad, and I refuse to and I know and he talks about how he was very well aware of the fact that he could be persecuted and prosecuted, and he's ready to undertake this battle. But what comes through in the excerpt that the editors have chosen for us is a sense of good faith that he had, that the numerous representations that he makes to different people in the bureaucracy, in the administrative machinery, after police action has taken place. So, just to give some context, after the police action has taken place, and Hyderabad has surrendered, the first sort of major change that takes place in Hyderabad is in its administrative machinery. So this account that Muhammad Haider is telling us is also about this transitional period within Hyderabad's history, in which Hyderabad's integration into the Indian Union is not just a military endeavor, but also a very seriously bureaucratic endeavor. So the remaking of Hyderabad, in fact, is stops with, in some sense, military action, but goes on for several years after as a bureaucratic undertaking, and the sort of bureaucratic violence that many civil servants or many others, non-civil servants, also faced is something that other kinds of scholarship, including my own work, has looked at, but which I will come to later. So Muhammad Haider is asked several times to leave for Pakistan, but he refuses. And he talks about how in the months after the police action, he's suspended, placed under suspension, and this is a suspension without any reason. So, on what grounds must I challenge my suspension is something that he asks, and this is a very common experience of Muslim police officers and Muslim government officers in post-police action Hyderabad, that mass suspensions are suspension notices are given out, and the recipients do not have any idea of what the charges leveled against them are. So Muhammad Haider meets everybody in the hierarchy, right from the military general to the chief administrator, to some of his former colleagues who successfully transitioned into the administration, but that is to no avail. A commission of inquiry is set up, and this is also a fairly common experience of Muslim officers of that period, that commissions of inquiry were set up, and there were and those who against whom trials of sort was supposed to take place were not sometimes even these inquiries were not did not take place, and they were dismissed from service, and there were no grounds for appeal. There was no grounds for appeal to revoke the decision, no grounds to even present your own case. So this is in so what Mohammed Haidar's account in this excerpt that the editors have chosen show us the ways in which um, the grounds of justice, or the mechanisms of law, or the due process of law actually is completely sidelined. And although Mohammed Haidar doesn't necessarily talk about this in this particular excerpt, this is part of a larger sort of discussion that's taking place within the Indian Union, as well as its representatives in Hyderabad, that there was a deep need felt to correct the disproportionate representation of Muslims in Hyderabadi bureaucracy. And so we've seen large scale import of officers from neighboring Indian provinces into Hyderabad, and there's much sort of dissent or discontent about this, not just among Muslims, but also among the emerging political elite of Hyderabad, who come from, say, the Hyderabad State Congress, for instance, who are very unhappy about this large-scale importing of officers from the Indian Union into Hyderabad. So this is the context within which Mohammed Haider is writing about the lack of a due process. And there are three things that I want to sort of draw the people's attention to. So he says, why is it that he asks the question and answers it himself as to why is it that it was not possible, despite the multiple entities that he had made, or multiple representations that he had made to various government officials, why is it that he didn't receive a modicum of fair hearing? And I'm just going to read a bit from the essay itself. Um, It proved impossible to obtain justice, not because I had been targeted by some vindictive individuals, but because the relationship between the two sides, that is the Indian and the Hyderabad side, had deteriorated to the point where it was no longer possible to entertain the Hyderabad point of view or to obtain a fair hearing for those identified with it. What should have been a simple matter of setting the record straight could not be accomplished because the basis of common values, mutual regard, and ways of communicating that normally sustain notions of fair play and justice had for the time being ceased to exist. Um, this is an important observation that Muhammad Haider has placed before us. And if we look at if you look at the archives of the Urdu press, for instance, they talk often about the ways in which the Indian Union officers were condemned for being acting as if they were a conquering force. And so. In the same paragraph, Muhammad Haider talks about this, and he says, in its place, there had risen up a structure of derogatory attitudes reminiscent of British or French colonial rule. The same systematic bias of separation and contempt that was applicable by the West towards colonial India was applied by Free India to an intractable Hyderabad. It was this tendency that opened up the way for injustices visited upon its civil servants. So I think this is really crucial for us to think about the ways in which violence, the different forms of violence that Hyderabadis had to face post police action. This was irrespective of what position they held with regard to India's Hyderabad's accession, integration, or surrender, whatever you might call. No matter what position they held, they were all treated in the same way as with a lot of suspicion and as enemies in fact. Um, and there were the second point that I want to make is something that Mohammed Haider talks to us about. He's writing this in retrospect, of course. So he's suspended from service, and he's no longer and he's not given a passport until he's around 50 years. But somehow manages to construct a comfortable life enough for him, he and his family. But many of the opportunities that might have been available in at an earlier point in time in terms of moving to more prestigious positions is no longer available to him. So he's faced some personal losses, and it is from this point of view that he makes 2 points. And one is the way in which Hyderabad's defiance is understood in history. And he says, if we were to say that, if we were to accept that, Hyderabad's defiance was immaterial, because the emergence of the Indian nation was this inevitable thing that was happening, and there was no way that Hyderabad could stand in the way of things, then this is actually the point of view of the victor of the Indian nationalist movement or of the Indian state. What would it then look like if you were to pay attention to the Hyderabadi point of view? And I think that is something that we need to pay attention to for us in the contemporary moment as well, when the Indian nation state is no longer something that one challenges or is accepted as the most acceptable form of political entity. It is important for us to remember that the 1940s, or the period between 47 to 50, was not necessarily the Indian nation was, or the Indian nation state was not a cemented entity. It was not. It's not the same entity that we see now, right? So it was still under negotiation. They were still under construction, and there were various possibilities that existed. The fact that it did not pan out does not mean that these possibilities were not legitimate or in fact were not legal. And I think that is a very important point that Mohammed Haider places before us. And he says, the last point that I want to make is He asks us to think about how do we view Hyderabad's action. Was Hyderabad mad, bad, and irredeemable? He asks, and he says there's a natural inclination to doubt the motives of an adversary. But can we dismiss one side's concern with being hustled into accession as irrational and accept the other's overriding drive towards merger as somehow predestined? This way, we end up by giving history a discernible direction, by identifying the outcome with the victorious cause. I teach history, and one of the things that I'm often talking to my students about is the idea of teleology. Right. So when we look at something from the contemporary moment, it may seem that it was always moving in this direction. It was always moving in the direction of what it is at the present. But if we were to be mindful, or if we were to be cognizant of, or if we were to be truly historical in our disposition, it is actually incumbent on us to think about the different possibilities, legal, ethical, legitimate possibilities that existed at any point in time in history. And I think that's one of the things that I take away from Muhammad Haidar's essay, which is that we need to pay attention to the Hyderabad in 1948 and the possibilities it presented, and the fact that these possibilities didn't quite pan out does not make them illegitimate as such. So I will stop with that. All right, so we've come to the end of our some of our comments on the chapters and the ways in which it spoke to us. I'm going to let the floor open to those of you who stayed with us for any questions or any comments that you might have had on some of the ways in which we've discussed. So the floor is open. The editors can also come in to talk a little bit about if they have anything to say about the comments or the discussions that we undertook. All right, so
If-
while we...
If
go
nobody
ahead,
is
Rahman.
if nobody is commenting, I have some comments. Thanks for Yamini. It was really nicely you brought out the conflict between Mulki and non-Mulki, and that essay, what Ali Our Jung does. So I have one thing about Qasim Rizvi. He is a universal evil. Everyone blames from right, left, state. Everyone says that Qasim Rizvi is the reason for a police action. I have anecdotal, very interesting story. After police action, when he was arrested, he was punished, he was in jail. There are a group of people, freedom fighters, and then MP actually, Chandrasekhar Vajpayee. He was the MP of Latur. He went and met Qasim Rizvi and said, he narrates that incident and said, he requested him by saying, leave everything past and come back and stay Latur. And then he narrates a very different kind of a Qasim Rizvi. I feel the way in which Qasim Rizvi has been portrayed and Qasim Rizvi has been said, we need to rethink about that portrayal in a certain way. This outsider Mulki and non-Mulki thing, Qasim Rizvi as a non-Mulki thing, further complicated in very nicely in a Shefali Jad's PhD, where she brings out very nicely Qasim Rizvi was outside to the Hyderabad, outside to the elite of an Hyderabad. And that's the reason why there is a lot of hatred towards, or a lot of people didn't understand what he's trying to do or whatever it may. So there is a lot of within Muslim, that angle she really nicely brings out. Also very important. I just wanted to say one more thing. Actually, this point is really nicely said in Muhammad Haidar's autobiography, where he says Qasim Rizvi was actually He was selected by the people. He represented hope and despair both of that time and period. So he really nicely puts in a certain perspective in Qasim Rizvi in that autobiography. I read it long back, but yeah. One more thing I just want to say something and stop. Is the 1938 is a very crucial moment to understand the journey of and what happens post processes also. And Ali Yavaz Jang's refusal to participate in mulki or democratic reform also, because 1938 it was shock for a Muslim that so many like 10,000 around 10,000 Hindus were sent to the jail. Arya Samaj that protest and thing. Out of it, 8,000 were came from outside, and there is a huge communal propaganda happens at that moment, and that really shocks Muslims, and that is a very crucial moment I feel, and we need to have more engagement around that to understand why certain positions were taken after. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. I think also Ali Arjang also coming from, I mean, his perspective, as I was saying, is also someone who whose view was also sidelined, but who also is able to navigate post. But he's not the loser in the sense that as other people who've lost a lot of things in 48. He's sort of able to retain a lot of things also in terms of his position, etc., etc. So absolutely, in terms of like it's quite black and white the way he constructs Qasim Rizvi for that matter. He does not really like he's literally like a very dismissive, saying that he was literally the problem kind of a thing. And yes, absolutely about the 38 is everything sort of the ground is set in 38 in terms of a lot of the positions which were taken and which were before that probably was still in flux, but a more concrete position is taken with whatever happens in 38. So absolutely a great point in terms of that being an important moment to be discussed. Yes.
Right. Ayub, you had some responses to promote, so maybe we could start with that.
Yeah, thank you, Swathi, and thank you, Pramod, for all the great work that you are doing. I just want to talk a little bit about the archives. So you said the archives is out there, and if I understood correctly, you also said that it is fairly accessible. So I would just like to dispute that a little bit, because yes, there are a lot of reports, narratives which are out there, which could be accessible to the person who is looking for it. But there are also several archives or several reports which we still have no clue as to where they are. One of them is the Pleaders Committee report, which was compiled in 1947. Gopal Rao Egbote talks about it. I've only seen a few excerpts here and there, but the full report has not been accessed or accessible, according to my knowledge. And then there is also a 1,500-page report by Jamiat Ulema Hind, the nationalist Muslim organization. They actually went out and compiled photographs and other data in all the districts before Pandit Suldaral actually went out. I was unable to find the report in the Jamiat Ulema's headquarters in Delhi or in their regional headquarters in Hyderabad. That report was presented to Maulana Azad, Nehru, and also to Sheikh Abdullah when he visited Hyderabad. There are about 50 pages. They have been published as an annual report, basically a summary of the original report, which is available, not easily, but it's still out there. And then there is also S. Nanjalingappa's report, the future chief minister of Karnataka, he was actually deputed by Sardar Patel to compile a report. In his autobiography, he mentions that it's an exhaustive report, and he basically gives a free ride to the officials who were accused of being oppressive or partisan. So I think there's still a vast archive that needs to be discovered and to be brought out. So I just wanted to point out that. And in terms of the book, yes, you are right. Many of the articles or pieces are available, but they're available to people who know. So our idea was to curate them and then to bring it out to people who might not be as much involved in researching this topic. And your comments on Qasim Rizvi, they're very insightful, but they are also could be misinterpreted, because if we try to humanize Qasim Rizvi, then one is accused of being an apologist. So it's a very, what's the right word? It's a very tricky position to talk about Qasim Rizvi. Qasim Rizvi's speeches were compiled in a book, interestingly, after 1948 and published from Hyderabad. And from those speeches, his persona emerges very differently than how he's portrayed in the official histories. And there is also his personal, everybody has a personal linkages to people from outside their own community. But Qasim Rizvi, especially so, had very deep links. His family physician was a person called Dr. Raj, forgetting her first name. So in his letters to his family from the jail, he writes, he always mentions, say my salam to Dr. Raj. And Dr. Raj apparently was harassed after police action. Then she had to go to Pakistan. In Pakistan also, she was hounded by the Pakistani authorities, thinking that she is a spy working for India. So then she had to come back to Hyderabad. So all those connections need to be explored. But it's a very tricky situation, because even in Ramachandra Guha's book, he uses the demonic terms, forgetting that a Latin term he deploys. So how to think about it is a tricky situation. Maybe a double biography of Shoaibullah Khan and Qasim Rizvi might provide an opportunity to provide a more nuanced characterization. Thank you.
Can I respond?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you, Ayub. I'm not disputing that these reports, what you said. By the way, this Pleaders Committee report is, I think, available in National Archives. And that Razakar poster, which was made up, that movie poster, similar, that front page of that is also very same of that Pleaders Committee report is also same image.
Right.
Yeah, so that report is, I think, it's available, Pleaders Committee report. But what you said about other reports, Jamatul Ulama's reports, and even the Swami Ramanand Tirth was asked to go and visit Marathwada and send report. His report is also available on police action. So there are, I feel, like Najlingappa you said.
Yeah.
So similarly, Ramanand Tirth also was asked to visit Marathwada, and the Farid Mirza also says that in his thing. But what is fascinating, so what you said is a very true, that we don't have much about violence thing. I just want to say that I tried to check the Maulana Azad archives and things. Even the state published that biography, his collected works and stuff. It ends that period of police action. There is nothing in that biography or his collected work that completely blacks out. So it's there. What you are saying is also right. But about Qasim Rizvi, I actually tried to look at the places of violence, try to document the violent places in my fieldwork is between Bidar to Usmanabad, that around 120-kilometer stretch. So I try to document the places where actually Razakar did violence, or even the pleaders committee report. They also documented that violence. I think they say around 80 people were killed. That report says that's very comprehensive report or something. So the violence what we are talking is also border camps which are coming up, and they are responding to that violence also. Or a lot of these nationalistic demands from the Razakar, they are not fulfilling, so they are happening. So what happened after police action is much more worse, and the intensity is that. So I don't think that we need to understand Qasim Rizvi as a figure much more complex manner. In a certain particular context, what even Jinnah, Pakistani, that biographer, I forgot her name, she does with Jinnah very nicely. So I feel that Qasim Rizvi was a complex figure, but those demands of times and complexities of time, with that context, we need to understand him, not just to villainize or demonize our nationalistic demands. We should be careful about the nationalistic demands. Sorry, that's the time.
Yeah. Thank you, Pramod. So, Swathi, can I make one more comment? One final one?
Yes, okay, last one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I did a content analysis of Qasim Rizvi's collected speeches. And one thing which immediately came out was that he never uses the words Hindu or kafir or anything like that. He's instead using casteist terms like Baniya and Brahman when he is trying to frame his opposition to the Indian government or Congress. So maybe there is some way out to analyze him through that lens. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ayub. If there are no questions, we can bring the session to an end. Thank you all for joining us for this book talk on 1948 Hyderabad readings. You've heard much critique and some discussions as well on the book, and we've heard from the editors what were some of their motivations. So all in all, it's been an enriching discussion about 1948, and hopefully, sorry, yes, Muti or Rahman, you had a point to make?
No, sorry.
Yeah, actually, I have joined from Muti's account. I'm so sorry.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so I've been listening the analysis from everybody so far, but I just want to add one thing, that there's so much has been talked about what is available, and because most of the work around 1948 revolves around, I mean, we are still trying to understand what has actually transpired, right? But the continuity of the event, or at least the repercussions that has been there in terms of memory or in terms of our realities. So I think more work could be sort of, I think since lot of our audience here and people who have joined are people who work around 1948. So I would like to maybe suggest, or rather just point out that more of the work has to come, what happened post police action and what lives have been, or what has happened to the state of Hyderabad and people living in erstwhile Hyderabad. So what effects police action has had on these lives. So I think those kind of discussions would even help us understand the event,
Yeah.
The scale of the event. I mean,
Yeah.
because it's not something that has just happened in that September,
Absolutely.
in 1 week or 2 weeks of
Yeah.
September, but rather it has its
Yeah.
effects, even which sort of continues even today. So
Sure.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think that to add. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, who are we listening to? I'm sorry, we didn't get your name.
Khurram, no?
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry, I didn't get that. All right.
I
Thank you,
thought
Khurram.
so. I think so, yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. I think it's a very important point that you make, and I think that was also the thinking behind organizing this book talk as well as this, I suppose, this anthology as well. And I think in the discussion we've had different sort of starting points or different lines of inquiry that one could perhaps look at. So Pramod talked about the 1938, the Satyagraha, etc., and the ways in which it sort of broke some kind of consensus that previously existed, perhaps. We've heard from Yamini, who's spoken about the ways in which perhaps certain personalities and looking at them may also give us some insights into the ways in which we could think about 1948 and the developments that led to it as well. And the editors also have spoken to us about the ways in which we don't look at 1948 or Hyderabad in this moment alone, only in isolation, but to look at it in the larger process of decolonization, the making of modernity, the emergence of nation states, and the place of different sort of communities in this new and hegemonic political entity. So I think we've had a great discussion and many things to think about. And I think the book's value lies in the fact that it offers us a lot of it offered us a lot of critique and in terms of how we can develop this, perhaps bring in writings from other Dakhini languages, perhaps look at lived experiences, perhaps look at oral testimonies, and so I mean, there is only a provisional closure, as Himabindu said, with this book. So, thank you all for joining us, and we'll bring this to a close for now. Yes, Anant. Last point.
No, it's not a point. I mean, the one single motivation for any publisher or editor is to sell the book or to make people read it. So I really urge all of you to ask people to buy it or read it. And there are many ways in which we could make the claim that this is an important book. To me, one of the most important things about this is the juxtaposition. Each of those pieces is available in all kinds of ways everywhere, but it's the way in which they're put together which is important. And so I'd really like it if people tell other people to buy it. Thank you.
All right. Thank
And
you.
Swathi, I would also like to announce that
Yeah.
second and third and fourth volumes are also underway. So look out for them.
Oh,
Yes.
wonderful. All right. Gita had something she'd like to share.
Yeah, I like this session very much, and changes the way in which I'm looking at academics, hopefully for the better. I want to encourage everybody here who is writing something to approach us, Southside Books, for publication. My only proviso would be that it should not be academic entirely. So when you do write an academic book, which you're bound to do, can you also make another presentation so that many more readers can access the important work that you're doing? I'm so excited over so many of the suggestions which have come out. But if
Yeah.
they're going to be sold by, Oxford to libraries and only scholars can access them, that's not going to change the world we're living in. So if you can make another book out of the work that you're doing, or help us do that, I'd be very grateful for any opportunity that comes our way. Anything to do with what happened in Hyderabad state is like crucial for us to carry on in the future. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gita. I think that also speaks to the motivations with which we started Khidki Collective and the work that we're doing. Is essentially we're realizing that as academics, we need to train ourselves into speaking and writing in ways that we are able to communicate to non-academic public. So I think that's been the primary motivation as well for Khidki Collective. So hopefully we can collaborate further, and hopefully this book talk has opened up some opportunities and possibilities for collaboration. All right. Thank you all for joining us, and see you another time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.